Good to see everybody. I had a great trip. You know, I've been going to Colorado since the first time my parents took me there when I think I was like 14. Fell in love with the mountains. And so, if I can get there once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times a year, I'm really happy, you know. So it's kind of my home away from home. And I usually drive out there because I like to get my mountain bikes and my gravel bike and all my gear and everything out there as well. And this particular trip was daunting. I got just outside of Lawrence, and it was like, 9 o'clock in the morning. And I was going about 80 miles an hour in a 75. And a deer came out of the median, and I caught it out of the corner of my eye. I slammed my brakes on, and I was in my Rubicon, and if you swerve and slam at that speed, you can flip those things really easily. So I kept it straight, and the thing veered in front of me, and my right front fender nailed it in the back and shot it up in the air and over into the right side of the median. And my adrenaline, you can imagine, was just off the charts. It's only the 3rd time I've ever hit a deer. The other 2 I hit on 152 at the nighttime. And one of them totaled one of my pickup trucks. Like, it almost came through my front windshield. But this one, I caught it on the front right bumper, launched it over there. Of course, I slowed down and pulled off on the next exit and assessed the damage. And I could still drive. I'd lost my front license plate, never did find it. And so I just thought, well, heck, I'm just going to keep going. Well, then, an hour or 2 later, I hit a bird. And I'm like, dang, now I'm getting like PTSD, I'm driving down the road, and now about an hour later, a big old cardboard box flies out in front of me over the highway into the median, and then just a puff of wind hits it, knocked it up in the air, and hit my front windshield with a box. So I hit a deer, a bird, and a box all in about 5 hours. I just about turned around and went home, It's like, dang, I don't know. I might just die if I keep going. I don't know. But anyway, I made it, and ended up being a great trip. I was glad I did. Met a crew out there at Mountain Film and Telluride for the Mountain Film Fest. And it's a great film festival. It's the oldest film festival in America. Started out with outdoor adventure and also focuses on social justice issues and environmentalism. So it's a great deal. And then I hiked and biked, and I'm getting to know quite a few people who live in Ridgway, Colorado, which is a little town there. And so, I'm a member of a coffee church there when I'm there now. And so lots of fun. So thank you, Greg, for bringing and delivering the message. And I hear you had Raina here, and so it's good stuff while I was gone. And yesterday I got out to Pride Fest, and we had a great crew out there. Thank you, Angelus and Chris and Jennifer and Michael and Candace and a whole bunch of folks out there celebrating and loving on people. And we had a table there where we shared it with other disciples' churches. And I'll head out there again this afternoon, and then I'll go from there to our Pentecost picnic. So the DOC churches in the Northland, Disciple of Christ Church in the Northland, are getting together this afternoon at 5 o'clock at Oak Grove Park in Gladstone. Our regional overseer will be there, and our new church ministries, Jose Martinez, who preached here once, will be there. Ron Rutledge is the new interim regional overseer. And many of you know I'm on the search team for the new regional overseer for the greater Kansas City area, and that's been quite a lot of work and process, and we're just in the middle of that right now, picking a new regional. So if you can make it out, they're going to have hot dogs and hamburgers. You can bring a side, your drinks, and a chair, and we'll be celebrating Pentecost Sunday, and that is what today is. That's why I'm wearing red, tongues of fire. Bill's got red, a few people Eric's got red, Joanne's got red, Clifford's got red, and Jennifer's got some red. So anyway, we got some fiery tongues in the audience today. Now, we're in this series called Adventures in Faith, and I'm doing a series on the parables of Jesus, okay? And, you know, one of my mentors, I've said this many times, said that faith is spelled R-I-S-K, because there's always an element of risk to faith. And every one of Jesus' parables is a challenge to a faith adventure. There's some kind of a challenge in it to live out and walk out in faith. So as I was thinking about Pentecost Sunday, I thought, gosh, what parable works for Pentecost? And I could have picked any number of them. I'm kind of doing a little bit of a weird one for Pentecost Sunday. So stick with me till I get to Pentecost with the passage that Jennifer read. But it's a parable that's been titled The Wicked Tenants. The Wicked Tenants. It's in Mark chapter 12. And if you look at the sequence of Holy Week in Mark's gospel, Jesus delivered this parable on Tuesday of Holy Week. So if we go all the way back to Palm Sunday, remember that there was the what we call the triumphal entry, but Jesus was actually kind of doing a mock protest of Pilate's entry from the west side of Jerusalem on the horses, fully empowered with their full power and army and, you know, the military armor and military weapons and all that, riding on horses. Jesus comes from the east side of Jerusalem on a donkey, and basically kind of a mock protest against the oppressor of the Roman Empire, right? Then he cleanses the temple because some of the temple authorities were in collusion with the Roman Empire, the oppressors, and that's who Jesus was really targeted in many of his teachings during Holy Week, which ultimately led to his crucifixion. And so one of the parables he told on Tuesday was the parable of the wicked tenants. And basically it starts out and says that there's a landowner who plants a new vineyard. Okay, this is Mark chapter 12, plants a new vineyard. And then he hires basically tenants to work that new vineyard. By the way, a new vineyard would take maybe up to 5 years to get into production, right? So this is a brand new vineyard, hires tenants to do it, and then he takes off. Well, then after a while, he sends some servants, they're called servants here, to sort of collect the fees that he wants to charge the tenant farmers that are working the new vineyard. And they kill them. And then they send a few more, they kill him. And then they finally, I'll send my son, my heir. And they kill the heir, right? So finally, the landowner gets mad. He kills all the tenants and then just hires a bunch of new ones. And that's the end of the parable. Isn't that powerful? You like change your life, right? Pentecost Sunday. How does this work? So here's the interesting thing. What's one of the historical interpretations of this, which I have a lot of problems with, but it's this. It's like, well, God's like the landowner, and then the Jews are like the tenants, and God sends the prophets, and they kill them, and then finally God sends his only son, and they kill them. So then God's mad at all the Jews, so he basically kills all them and then brings in a new group of people that will work the vineyard, and that's the Gentiles. And that's been one of the interpretations of the wicked tenants. But I have some challenges to that, okay? So let's think about this for a minute. Number one, this is clearly echoing back to a passage in Isaiah 5 where God plants a vineyard, and the vineyard is Israel. And God is the owner of the land. Israel is the vineyard itself. And if you read Isaiah chapter 5, what happens is the leaders of the Jewish people, Isaiah was critiquing the corrupt kings of Israel. And the corrupt kings of Israel were the oppressors of the poor. The oppressors of the people, most of the people in Israel were poor. And so Isaiah 5 is actually where God owns the vineyard, Israel's the vineyard, the corrupt kings are oppressing the poor, and so God's going to bring judgment to the vineyard because of the corruption of the powerful elite. Okay, that's Isaiah 5. So I think that plays into this a little bit, but Jesus is very subversive sometimes in the way he tells things. So let's go back into history just a little bit. Remember when Israel took the land and portioned it, it was portioned to the 12 tribes, except for the Levites who served in the temple. And so everybody had a portion of land, and that they worked the land, and this was the wealth of the people was vested in the land, and they were either farmers or vineyard people, or they herded cattle and sheep and all that kind of stuff. They were husbandry or agricultural. Well, what would happen is, let's say if you had a bad crop year and you couldn't feed your family. Well, what would be nice is if your other friends who maybe had a good crop year would help you out, right? But what happened is some of the owners, imagine this, were greedy. And so if they saw one of their fellow Israelites in trouble, they wouldn't help them out, but they would actually take over their land and then offer them a job to work the land that they just took over, which used to be their land. And so if you think about Jesus' audience, most of Jesus' audience was poor, right? And Jesus had a pretty harsh critique against the corruption that had colluded with the Roman Empire, the oppressor. And so if most of Jesus' audience heard this parable, would they feel more sympathy toward the landowner or the tenants? Probably the tenants, because most of them were poor, right? And so what's interesting is that built into the Torah is this idea that nobody actually owns the land, only God owns the land. And the land is on loan from God. And so none of the Israelites, even though they were apportioned land, actually owned the land. God's the owner of the land. They were just working it for God. And so they should be nice and generous to everybody and help everybody out. But instead, some of those landowners became corrupt and tried to take over. They took advantage of those who were in hard times, and they took over more and more and more and more and more land. Well, because there was justice built into the Torah system, on the 7th year of sevens, this was year 50, that was the year of Jubilee. And so the year of Jubilee, there was actually an anticipation that this might happen, that people would take over more and more and more and more and more land, taking advantage of those who fell on hard times. And so the 50th year reset everything. Every 50 years, all the land went back to the original landowners. If you had debt, you owed debt, it was freed, and you got a free start, you got to start all over again. So if you were in debt and working somebody else's land and you'd lost your land, you would really look forward to 50 years. Let's hope that you weren't born, and you have to wait 50. Maybe you just had to wait 10, or depending on how it landed, right? So this was kind of an economic justice system to try to reset things and to try to keep greedy landowners from dominating everything. Well, guess what? In all of Israel's history, we don't have evidence that Jubilee was ever celebrated. Imagine that. The powerful got in control, and they decided, we'll celebrate Passover, we'll celebrate Pentecost, we'll celebrate, high and holy days, but let's just forget about Jubilee. And so people never got their land back, never got a new start, and usually anytime they either worked as tenant farmers, which basically means they were slaves, working another rich landowner's thing, or they even went to jail and were put in prison because they couldn't pay their debts, and they went into debtor's prison. So this was about economics more than anything. So here's what I think. I don't think God is the landowner in this parable. I think the corrupt landowners are the landowners in this parable. And I think that there's not really a good character in this parable, because the landowners are corrupt, and then the tenants are angry and resentful at those powerful landowners. And so when the landowner sends their guy to collect, they kill him. And then when the heir of the landowner comes, they're like, well, let's get him because the whole family's screwing us over, right? And they kill him. Think about it this way, if you want to. Any of you ever see The Godfather? Any of you ever seen any mafia movie ever? Let me see. Anybody not ever seen a mafia movie? Okay. Stella, you have not seen a mafia movie. All right. Well, yeah, anyway. But yeah, so think about Vito Corleone, Don Corleone, and then think about his son Michael Corleone, right? And think about when the mafia goes in and takes over an area, what do all the business owners have to do? They have to pay tribute to the boss, right? And if the boss sends his servants to collect, they're usually rough guys, right? They're going to beat the crap out of you if you don't pay up, right? And so the people who are the business owners resent the mob boss. They don't like having to pay them because it's their business and they're working their butts off. And this guy comes in and then he sends the hard guys that break the knuckles and do all that kind of stuff to collect. So there's a resentment built into that system. And if Vito Corleone sends Michael Corleone to collect, you know, they're not too happy with Vito or Michael either way. You get the idea, right? So I think that Jesus is telling a parable in Holy Week that is a critique of the whole corrupt system. The powerful oppress the poor get resentful to the powerful, and what do? They resort to violence. And so then the landowner resorts to their violence and kills them and then just starts over again and puts new owners in there. And so it's the cycle of violence. Violence begets violence, and it's a cycle, and it never ends. Jesus, I think, would condemn the tenants for killing because violence isn't the answer to oppression. On the flip side, neither is the landowner's corruption, and he would have critiqued the whole system and called it all corrupt. Top to bottom, violence isn't the answer. Jesus was a nonviolent person who resisted the oppressed. Who resisted the powerful on behalf of the oppressed, but didn't resort to violence. Instead, he lays his life down willingly out of love in order to bring hope and new life from death to resurrection. And so during Holy Week, Jesus tells this parable, ultimately crucified on Thursday, resurrected on Sunday. And then there's 40 days of appearances. 7 different appearances are recorded in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus' resurrected person filling the disciples who were defeated and crushed now with new faith, new hope. In the darkest moment of your life, when it feels like everything has failed, there's this percolation of resurrection hope. Maybe something good can come out of death. Maybe something good can come out of oppression if we respond in faith and love and unity and radical inclusion of all people. And so on day 40 after the resurrection, Jesus ascends, and then he tells, hey, wait around, tarry. And so there's about 120 people. They tarry in the upper room. And this day, over 2,000 years ago, something crazy happens, right? I'm wearing red today, representing the tongues of fire, right? It comes into the room, and this 120 people are filled with the Spirit, and they begin to speak in languages. How many of you know more than one language? How many of you ever made up a language? You know, let me tell you this. I've studied languages, historical languages. I've studied Semitic languages. I've studied Ugaritic and Aramaic and Hebrew and Greek and all these kind of things. Let me say this. Every language on the planet, and there's thousands of them, are made up. Did you know that? They're made up. How many of you like Lord of the Rings, J.R. Tolkien? How many of you know he made up a language in there? Elfin, right? There's a band called Sigur Rós from Iceland. They make up a language and sing in it. They're a super popular band. They rolled through here in Kansas City a few years ago. They sing in other languages. They just make up languages and sing. Languages are a creative process of the human spirit. You know, if you meet somebody who doesn't speak English and you want to build a deep friendship with them, what's one of the most loving things you can do? Well, hug them, yeah. Be kind, but you can start trying to learn their language. And so here at the day of Pentecost, remember this, On these high and holy festivals, Jerusalem could swell. Jerusalem had maybe 100,000 people in it at this time, but it could swell by 100,000 or more. Passover would be one of the huge ones, would swell by, which would probably grow to close to, some people estimate 500,000 people during Passover. Pentecost Sunday was a harvest celebration, probably swelled by an extra 100,000 people in this small town of Jerusalem. I mean, it's not a big town, 100,000. Kansas City, 1.5 million if you count the whole metropolitan area. This is not a huge town, right? Swells by 100,000 people, and it's Jewish people from all around the world who speak all different languages. They've been dispersed all around the world. They come to Jerusalem, but they speak different languages from all around the world. Basically, the whole world is represented right there in Jerusalem on Pentecost Sunday. And they're in that room, and now the Spirit comes, and now they begin to speak in the languages, and everybody's hearing in their own languages. And these are uneducated, unsophisticated Galileans speaking fluent Parisian with the right accent. You see what I'm saying, right? This is a pretty amazing thing. And what happens is that Peter then draws a crowd, and Peter stands up. He preaches about the resurrection of Jesus and the hope and the forgiveness and the new life and the new community that we can build in protest to the corrupt system. We build communities rooted in love and forgiveness and grace and generosity and taking care of one another and including everybody, even those languages that we don't speak, even those people that are different from us and look different and talk different and act different. And we build community in protest to the corrupt system of power and oppression. Because once Peter got up and preached, about 3,000 people gave their lives to follow Jesus. And instead of going back home, they decided to stick around. There's something so new going on. Let's build some community right here in Jerusalem that's rooted in a different set of values than oppression and corruption and retaliation and the cycle of violence. And so we see on Pentecost Sunday that after Peter preached and 3,000 people came, that they did something very radical. They built a new community rooted in the spirit of generosity and love and inclusion. And listen what they did. All the believers, this is Acts chapter 2, verse 42, on the day of Pentecost, this day, a little over 2,000 years ago, all the believers devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to sharing in meals, including the Lord's Supper, and to prayer. A deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders, and all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions. See, they might have lived somewhere else, but they decided, hey, I'm going to sell everything, and I'm going to stay here. And I'm going to just share everything I got, because we're building a new community rooted in generosity and love and inclusion. And so they sold their property and possessions, shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together all in the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added. Wow. You might say, well, isn't that a little idealistic? Well, what else are you going to commit yourself to? You're going to commit yourself to a false, corrupt system? Or are you going to commit yourself to love and grace and mercy and generosity and building communities that actually rooted in love? All the things we go through, but we can come together in love and find joy and share with one another even when we're on difficulty and hardship. This is the power of Pentecost Sunday. I think we need to learn each other's languages. You listen to somebody long enough and learn their language of their heart, the language of their hurts, the language of their passions, the language of their personality, you will begin to build a friendship rooted in that kind of understanding and love. We need to learn each other's languages. Let's pray. God, come, do a work in our hearts today. Man, we live in a time where all around the world we can see corruption and the power and the corruption of power and the oppression of peoples around the world. But there are these communities of love, and God, allow us to be one of these, where even the most difficult times in the face of hardship and even death, we can come together rooted in love, rooted in grace, rooted in forgiveness, rooted in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and the power of the Spirit that brings unity. So do that work in our hearts today, we pray. In Jesus' name.